The 365 has to be one of the most popular subcompacts on the market, and Sig knows it because they made this for their all-loving Sigaholics. In this video, I review the P365 AXG Legion. If you're familiar with this platform, I'm not going to touch much on the modularity of it, but what is really special is when Sig decided to add this integrated comp, which we saw in the X macro. Now, what was actually great about that is if you already carried the 365 XL, which I like, and this is mine right here, it actually fits in the same holster, so the footprint isn't compromised, and the grip actually became longer, which also gave a higher round capacity if you're not familiar with that. Now, I just want to take a brief moment to talk to my beloved YouTube manual reviewer. This gun right here is in its stock configuration. There's no modification done to it, and it comes this way. The only thing that you may see different is that I've added an optic on it, which is not against YouTube policies because there's no internal modification of any sort. So let's get to it. Now let's talk about what you get with it. Well, you get this fun sticker pack just to let you know that you are in their Legion, and the most importantly is that you get 3 17-round magazines, which is a big pro for me because these are $60 a piece and they are tailored specifically for the AXG Legion. As you'll see, there's a chevron insignia consistent with the Legion there. Now this gun's MSRP starts at $1,199, so we have got a lot to talk about. Now, I already carry P365s normally, and so there are a lot of things that already jump out to me right away. Largely the weight of this. It's the biggest thing that catches my attention because when we're talking first impressions, we want to see that match as close to the price as much as possible. Believe it or not, when I went and weighed it, it was only about 3 ounces more than the X macro, which I was surprised because it felt way heavier than that. And what that ended up doing is creating a better balance in the hands. Where this gun stood out to me is when I did my transition drills with this, I was able to get on target fairly easy just because swinging this gun around was a very natural thing. And the biggest thing too is that with the added weight, it does settle a little bit better than its polymer counterpart. Now, just touching on the grips here, these are G10 grip panels here that you have here. It's not unusual to see this type of setup on a metal framed gun. So the one thing you'll notice though is that the back strap and the front strap are going to be stationary and part of the frame. Now, I will say that the ergonomics feel very similar to the large back strap on the macro grip. And that's what they carried over here. And so where your sizability is going to be adjusted is if you decide to change panels later on, but I wouldn't change it because these grips feel great. Not only they feel great, they look great as well. The texturing on it too, I would say is probably just a touch under aggressive. It's something that you can take in a performance setting and get a good grip on while being able to carry it. So I don't think you're necessarily sacrificing anything other than that you get a really cool looking grip here. You have texturing on the front and the back and a really solid undercut underneath here to get as high as possible up underneath the grip tang of this. These are their X-ray sights, which do function in the dark. You have a large green dot up front, and if you're in that night situation, you have these 2 smaller dots, and they do illuminate just enough to give you a good reference should you get in that situation where you need them in that. With the contrasted size from the front relative to the back, it wasn't necessarily disruptive to me when I was shooting it, so I'd say Sig did a really good job with the rear sights. Now, one thing that was carried over here when they introduced the X macro is that these sights end up staying on the slide. So if you look on my old XL here, you'll notice when I go to put a Romeo 0 on it that you actually end up losing your rear sights and you have to kind of rely on anything that may be on the optic itself. So you do have the ability to co-witness, but that's something I want to kind of touch on very briefly because I actually have an optic on here that Sig has said, hey, we're making this for our guns and our type of series. Now, I will say that the deck height on the Romeo X is just a touch high, so I will say that you do see a little bit on the bottom there, and it covers about half to about 2/3 of the front green sight there when you actually look through it. Now, knowing that has the Shield RMS cut, I'm curious if any of you in the comments can maybe speak to either this gun or even the X macro and say, hey, you can coat witness, I would be curious to hear that. But I just don't have that quite like I would like on this. Now, the one thing I want to talk about is the comp, or the expansion chamber as they've also called it. I will say it is effective, and you really appreciate it more when you start to use defensive ammo, such as when I decided to actually put Sig's 124 plus P ammo through this. And the hotter the ammo that you put through it, the better this gun returned to zero. And a large part of that is because the gas is pushing upward against that to bring the front of the muzzle down. And between having just that little feature and the added weight, I loved how this thing returned to zero. I mean, I felt the doubles when I would do that on that particular drill. I just wanted to push it more and more. Now, I would have to kind of do practice to get really refine it, but as I started to get more used to it, I was putting super solid groups on these things. Even in my transition drill, you'll see that I put really tight groups together. And on the doubles portion of this, I was getting them to about 27, 26 splits at 10 yards and about a 4-inch group. So there is something to say between all the little things adding up to make a better gun. The magwell on this thing, although it's not very big in terms of real estate, it sure is effective because it definitely does funnel inwards towards this, and it already has that support that's already integrated into the frame. Now you see that it does poke out a little bit. I wouldn't let that concern you if you're kind of worrying about little details like that, because essentially a lot of times what happens is that the shoulder of the base pads on the magazine can lie against that, so you don't have over insertion. So I found doing reloads with this thing were incredibly quick and fast, and I saw that when I would shoot matches with this gun, that doing reloads were something I really wasn't thinking about. And a lot of times too, you get these guns that are a little bit lighter and you just find that you have to flick them out more, or mags can get hung up easily. I think having between a metal frame and a nice magwell, it made doing reloads with this thing very pleasurable. So let's talk about the trigger here. What I like is that they carry over the X macro or their X series type trigger, which is this flat face trigger here. And so walking you through this, you've got a good amount of pre-travel to where you get to a first wall. Now you're going to push through a good amount of creep to get to the last wall. So as you'll see, I'm pushing it through right now. Okay, and right there I believe is about where it's about to break. And what I like is that this trigger breaks right at 90 degrees. Now, the reset is you're gonna have to actually go through all that. So you'll see it's quite far. And you're gonna have to go through that creep particularly again. And here I am back at 90 degrees, and it's about just a touch over a 5-pound pull. So when I would do anything short range or anything like that, it wasn't particularly a challenge. It became a challenge as I started to go further out. And so when I did my 25-yard build drill, I actually had to get acclimated to both how this trigger felt, as well as my need to not want to push this gun harder because I loved how it split. So what I ended up doing towards the end of it is dialing back my speed. And once I got there, I was able to get the accuracy out of that, as you'll see in these two final runs. But you're going to see that I can't quite get the accuracy like you would see me get with a 1911. Now, I would also say against like other hammer-fired guns in this category, such as the Shadow 2 Compact, I can't quite create the performance that I would like to at range, largely due to the characteristics of the trigger on this particular gun. Now, that's my experience with that. As far as the gun in its category, that's probably very acceptable accuracy at range for this gun. Now, before I move along here, I want to ask that if you like this video, hit that like button, and you're going to want to subscribe because you're going to want to see this gun go against the Shadow 2 Compact as well as the Langdon Tactical PX4 Storm. All right, so let's talk about the big pros of this gun. I feel that the asking price does reflect the improvements well enough to be consistent with the price, meaning that you get these G10 grips. The biggest thing is you get this aluminum grip as well as this magwell, and additionally you get an extra mag with it. So when you look at this in the big picture of it, you do get something special. And now that is reflected too and validated when you look at how this gun is in the shooting experience. I mean, it is markedly improved in the short range performance versus the X Macro. And I found manipulating it, whether it was reloads, transitions, or splitting quick, was definitely on par with what I would expect, not only with a gun that's, of this size and my carry gun, but also a gun that is reflective of sustaining the performance at that rate. And that has to lean into the largest pro of this, is that there was not a sacrifice for what it was intended to design and do, which was be a concealed carry gun. And it certainly pushes the limits of performance as much as you can, geometrically speaking, with a gun this size. Now let's talk about a few cons here. With the price, I believe that Sig could have offered a slightly better trigger with this, whether that was an improved feel here in the creep or a drop in the pull weight. I believe that could have been an option. And that's substantiated too when you compare that the Shadow 2 Compact, which has entered this market, has about a 3.5 pull in single action, and it feels incredible. The one thing too I want to harp on too is the Cerakote finish. Now, why is that a big deal? Well, that is not as durable of a finish, and right here I've already managed to actually scratch it a little bit on the top here. Thankfully nothing from the holster side of it from draws, but this is from when I cleaned it and I accidentally dropped it on one of my tools. Or I would say that that's something I would probably consider for the long-term durability of this, especially if you plan to carry this often. Now, the other funny thing here is that we have this Romeo X on here. I just find it odd that a native optic doesn't exactly co-witness as good as it should. When I think co-witness, I think full usability of my iron sights if I need them. This is more about acceptable iron sights. So I think in the short range, let's say less than 7 yards, you're fine. But for anything that you're shooting out, anything past 15 to 20 yards, that's going to be kind of disruptive to look at, especially if you're in a situation of duress trying to yank out the precision of this. Overall though, I like this gun a lot. I really appreciate how it feels, how it shoots. I mean, as far as the price asking for it, I think it's worth it. And in fact, I'm going to keep this gun personally for myself and use it as my carry gun going forward. Now, one thing I didn't get to really do in this particular review is see how it shoots with the optic, because I'm curious to see how this thing performs at distance with it. So I'll bring those notes with me into the performance carry shootout. Now, until then, why don't you guys get out there and go shooting, and we will see you at the range.